Hello, I'm Alon Burstein, a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here bringing you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War. It is currently the evening of February 5th, 2024 in the United States, the morning of February 6th, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, while all sides are still waiting for Hamas's answer, which still has not been officially delivered, there are reports of ongoing negotiations that are being had meanwhile behind the scenes, primarily between Israel and Qatar, in order to try to work out some of the sticking points should Hamas give, as it is expected to give, a positive answer, while that answer will still require further negotiations. In addition to this, Al-Ahbar, which is a Hezbollah-affiliated newspaper in Lebanon, reported today that Hamas has updated Qatar about its internal negotiations and has also given Qatar the general vibe regarding the answer that it is going to give when it has authorization from the leadership to give the answer. According to a report, Hamas is expected to demand a complete ceasefire and international guarantees that Israel will end the war at the end of the hostage deal. However, like I stated before, that the response will still be overall positive. However, that Hamas wants to have further negotiations to reach that final ceasefire. The report adds that Hamas's military wing in Gaza informed Qatar that the hostages are not in danger. Meanwhile, as has been stated every day since the conclusion of that conference in Paris, Prime Minister Netanyahu again stated today that the aims of the war are to destroy Hamas and to kill the Hamas leadership, and that the war will not stop before that, adding that this is going to take months. Regarding the hostages, he explicitly stated, and I quote, "We have released 110 of our kidnapped people. We are continuing to work on this, but Hamas's demands include things that we will not agree to. The key, i.e., meaning the key of how many Palestinian prisoners will be released in exchange for each Israeli hostage, the key needs to be similar to the previous deal. The attempt will not be realized at any price," i.e., Netanyahu is again stating that Israel is not going to agree to any price that Hamas demands. Again, sources in Israel have stated that the fact that Netanyahu every single day is repeating this publicly while Hamas is debating the deal is very suspicious, because he's seemingly constantly saying Israel's not going to agree to what Hamas may demand. And sources in Israel are saying that Netanyahu actually wants Hamas to set a high demand, thereby allowing Israel to prolong the deal and not accept the terms of Hamas. Whether that is true or not, that is speculation. The fact is, Netanyahu is stating that, in fact, every day. In addition, it was reported today in Israel that Israel again has asked Qatar for information regarding the medical deal that was several weeks ago already, where Israel exchanged allowing more medicines to come into the Gaza Strip in exchange for medicines being delivered to the hostages. Prime Minister Netanyahu handled those negotiations personally and stated that he has guarantees from Qatar that the medicines will reach the hostages. However, no guarantees were actually given, and as it turns out, Israel has still not heard if the medicines did in fact reach the hostages. Moving on to the fighting in the Gaza Strip. Today there was a rocket sent from the Gaza Strip towards the area of Yad Mordechai down south. This is the first rocket sent in the last 2 days. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, the IDF again called upon Palestinian civilians in the western parts of Gaza City to immediately evacuate to the designated safe zones in Deir el-Balah in the central parts of the Gaza Strip. The neighborhoods that were affected specifically were Al-Nasser, Sheikh Redwan, Al-Shati refugee camp, As-Savara, Sheikh Al-Jalin, and Tel El-Khalawa. The IDF has been calling upon civilians in these regions to evacuate for the last several days, likely over a week already, and this is likely in anticipation of the IDF expanding its operations that it is carrying out in Gaza City towards these areas. Specifically in Gaza City, in El-Shati refugee camp, the IDF operation is continuing. The last several days, the IDF has been raiding the refugee camp again and again. Today it was reported that armored divisions entered the area as well. The IDF spokesperson stated that the aim of the northern operations are to single out specific locales and carry out thorough operations in them rather than sweeping through the entire part of the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Substantial weaponry was discovered in El-Shati refugee camp, with gun battles reported and many Hamas operatives reportedly either killed or arrested. In addition to this, in Gaza City, the IDF reported that it raided an area south of Palestine Square. That is one of the strongest headquarters of Hamas that was taken over during the IDF operation up north. It was also reported this is near an underground network of Hamas. The IDF is reportedly pursuing a Palestinian Islamic Jihad unit in the areas of Zaytun that is responsible for rocket launches that launched from the northern parts of the Gaza Strip in the last week. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, there was substantial bombardments reported in the Deir el-Balah area. This is several days in a row. There's been reports of bombings in Deir el-Balah that have killed many Palestinians. In the El-Maghazi refugee camp, the Al-Quds brigades, the military wing of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, reported firing mortars at IDF soldiers that were operating in the refugee camp. Moving down south to the areas of Yunis, where most of the fighting is concentrated, there are ongoing gun battles reported, including many face-to-face confrontations between the IDF and different Hamas operatives. Air bombings were also reported against Hamas units that were trying to lay mines in an area near IDF ground forces. Dozens of Hamas operatives were reported killed after they tried to lay an ambush to IDF soldiers. The Al-Qassam brigades, that is the military wing of Hamas, reported firing several Yassin 105 missiles against IDF tanks, as well as at a house where IDF soldiers were held up. In addition, the Al-Quds brigades also reported attacks against IDF soldiers in the areas of Yunis, specifically firing Grad missiles in the El Amal areas of western Yunis. In addition to this, there were a lot of reports throughout the day about the IDF's intended plans for Rafah, the last major stronghold, the most southern city in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. What happened today is Defense Minister in Israel, Yoav Gallant, stated in a press conference that the ground operation in the Gaza Strip is proceeding as planned. He added that 18 of the 24 Hamas's brigades have been dismantled, and that half of Hamas's terrorists have been injured or killed. He then added that the IDF will get to Rafah as well as to the central parts in the Gaza Strip, and also added that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, is on the run and is not really running the war anymore. After this report, there were additional reports that came out that the IDF is developing its operational plans for Rafah. Specifically, the IDF is already developing how it is going to invade Rafah and from which areas, and what it is going to do about the civilians that are amassed in Rafah. Reportedly, there are over 1 million Palestinian civilians from the entire Gaza Strip that have taken refuge in Rafah, in addition to another roughly 500,000 that are in the refugee camps around Rafah. According to reports, Israel informed Egypt today that it will evacuate the Gazans from Rafah before it carries out its military operation there, and in an attempt to assuage Egypt's concerns that if the IDF does actually invade Rafah, there will be a mass fleeing of Palestinians that will end up crossing the border and entering Egypt. According to the report, Israel is actually considering changing its policy and allowing Gazans to return up north from Rafah rather than trying to evacuate them elsewhere prior to the invasion. However, it is also reported the IDF is considering allowing them to relocate to other areas rather than up north, possibly back to Yunis or to the central parts of the Gaza Strip. In relation to all of this, there was a question today proposed to the U.S. State Department about Yoav Gallant's statements. The U.S. State Department stated, and I quote, Rafah is an important corridor of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Rafah is also an important corridor for foreign citizens, including Americans, who want to leave the Gaza Strip, and where over 1 million civilians are taking shelter. We, of course, want any operation in that area to take this into consideration. In addition to this, an estimate was published in Israel today regarding Hamas's rocket array in the Gaza Strip. According to the report, Hamas still has an estimated 1,000 rockets and missiles that are buried in launching sites and ready to launch, and the reason they're not being launched right now is because both the disarray of the different Hamas units in the Gaza Strip, as well as Hamas actually calculating they would rather save them to launch at a later date. The report includes that it will take the IDF an estimated 1 to 2 years to uncover and dismantle all of the rocket and missile threat from the Gaza Strip, since most of these are actually buried underground and requires first finding where they are, then engineering units surveying the area, uncovering them, and dismantling them safely before they are destroyed. Regarding casualties, no IDF soldiers reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. The total number of IDF killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began is still 225. 2 IDF soldiers are reported injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. The total number of IDF soldiers that are injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began is 1,302. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting 113 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians that were killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 27,478. 66,835 Palestinians are reported injured in the Gaza Strip, and there are still several thousand buried under the rubble and presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres announced today the establishment of an independent commission of inquiry that will examine the activity of UNRWA. So the commission is specifically supposed to inspect if UNRWA did all that it can in order to ensure the neutrality of its workers, and is going to publish its conclusions by the end of April, and there will be also an interim conclusion in the coming weeks. Israeli Foreign Minister welcomed the statement, stating that Israel will provide the commission with evidence about UNRWA's involvement in terrorism. In addition, a letter was sent today by over 20 coalition and opposition members of Knesset in Israel to the different countries that suspended their UNRWA funding pending these investigations, calling upon them to make the decision permanent, to defund UNRWA, and to set up a different agency since UNRWA is involved in terrorism, according to that letter. Spain, in turn, announced that it will grant UNRWA an increased budget this year, granting an additional $3.8 million as a result of the budget that has been slashed. The total budget of UNRWA per year is over $800 million. However, Spain's addition, at least during the temporary period while these different countries have frozen their budgets is going to help UNRWA tremendously. UNRWA stated that it's going to run out of funding by the end of February. Meanwhile, in Israel, Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir stated that the U.S. administration needs to stop pressuring Israel to allow humanitarian aid and fuel into the Gaza Strip, since these go directly to Hamas. In addition, UNRWA stated today an aid truck that was carrying food was hit by the IDF Navy bombardment in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. The IDF said that it is examining this claim. Other news, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi today stated that Egypt is going to continue to help Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, adding that over 2,200 Palestinians have been treated in 47 different hospitals in Egypt over the last several months. It is noteworthy that Egypt right now is fighting also a war of words with Israel. Israel stated that humanitarian aid is not entering the Gaza Strip as a result of Egypt. Egypt heavily condemned this. That is the context in which Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's statements come in. Regarding the entrance of aid trucks, once again, there was no report of how many aid trucks came into the Gaza Strip. This is now a constant. In the last week, only one day out of the last week, there's been a report of how many aid trucks came in, so we don't know how many trucks entered the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. Moving on to the West Bank, there was an attempted Palestinian attack today against different border police soldiers that were in the West Bank. A 14-year-old Palestinian approached a border patrol police officer near the Al-Izaria village. He tried to stab them. He was shot and killed. Regarding IDF activity, substantial IDF activity was reported in several different parts of the West Bank. These include the Eid Beit Ilma refugee camp, Beit Omar north of Hebron, where a bag with a dozen Molotov cocktails was caught, Tulkarem, Ramallah, and Khalkhul. Several confrontations were reported specifically in the areas of Tulkarem where gun battles were reported. A total of 33 Palestinians were reported arrested throughout these different operations in the last 24 hours. Other news related to the West Bank, the IDF Central Command carried out a big training exercise of escalations in the West Bank, with one of the scenarios being drilled was the kidnapping of Palestinians by Jews. As part of the drill, those who were simulating kidnappers wore vests marked simulating enemies. This came under heavy condemnation by the settler movement, as they stated that they were being portrayed as enemies of Israel. The IDF put out a clarification stating they did not intend to mark settlers as enemies, and that the vests are part of routine training. However, that this was a mistake and will not be used in future exercises such as this. In addition to this, related to the West Bank, in a heated Likud debate today, ministers voiced their opposition of allowing Palestinian workers from the West Bank to re-enter Israel, adding that this amounts to trying to buy off Palestinians to not carry out attacks. Israel's defense establishment is repeatedly stating that the fact that most of the work permits of Palestinians in the West Bank entering Israel have been cancelled since October 7th is resulting in mass unemployment, which is then being translated into frustration, and that Palestinians are actually joining violent organizations because of this. The security establishment is repeatedly asking the political establishment to re-allow Palestinians to enter and work in Israel. Right now, the political establishment has not made any decision. In addition, moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon, continuous rockets and missiles and mortars were sent from Lebanon targeting the northern parts of Israel today. These targeted the areas of Hardov, Kibbutz Bar'am, Nahariya, Dovev. There was a substantial barrage of rockets to the area, Yaruna and Avivim. Regarding IDF activity, the IDF reported that warplanes attacked Hezbollah military compounds in Livona, as well as a military headquarters in the Jabalin village, and military structures from where Hezbollah units were operating in the villages of Beit Lif and Rashait. In addition, other retaliations were also reported against launching sites. Lebanese news sources reported IDF artillery fire in the areas of Adaharia, Tir Herfa, Zabkin, as well as El Jabin. In addition, the Amal group announced that 3 of its operatives were killed in IDF attacks in Beit Lif. This is significant because Amal is a much smaller organization than Hezbollah. However, yesterday it announced that it carried out several of the rocket attacks that were launched in the last several days. If Amal is also beginning to operate, this does not add a major threat to Israel. Amal, like I stated, is much smaller than Hezbollah. However, it is adding another actor into the array, which will be significant if things escalate, or if there does come to some sort of diplomatic agreement between Israel and Hezbollah. All of a sudden, there's going to be another actor that says this may not apply to us. We may not honor these agreements. Hezbollah also stated that 3 of its operatives were killed in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of operatives that Hezbollah claims were killed by the IDF in the war to 182. The IDF states that number is much higher. Moving on to some of the regional developments, there was a reported drone attack against a U.S. base in eastern Syria today. 6 Kurdish militia people, part of an outfit that is supported by the United States, were killed. I will add, this report was not confirmed by the U.S. Central Command or other reports. It was a report from sources on the ground, so it remains to be seen what exactly happened. In other news, Sky News in Arabic reported that at least 40 Houthi operatives have been killed in the U.S.-UK attacks in Yemen in the last 2 days. Al Jazeera also reported the coalition attack earlier today in in the Hudaydah port. However, once again, this was not confirmed by U.S. Central Command, so it remains to be seen what actually happened there. Right now, that report is that the attack did occur in the Hudaydah area. Al Jazeera reports are usually fairly accurate that attacks occurred, but we don't know exactly what was targeted. Moving on to some of the political and general trends for the last 24 hours, in the press conference he was giving, Defense Minister of Israel, Yoav Gallant, was asked about the statements of Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir, where he condemned the Biden administration. Yoav Gallant stated, "The national leadership that makes decisions does not include Minister Ben-Gvir." In turn, Ben-Gvir responded that he is indeed not part of the conception cabinet that is deciding on humanitarian aid, withdrawing the idea from Gaza and claiming that Hamas was not deterred, i.e. we are seeing more fractions within Israel's expanded cabinet as Yoav Gallant, Minister of Defense, and Itamar Ben-Gvir, Minister of National Security, are blaming each other for different things that are related to the war. In addition to this political news in Israel, the leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, met with Prime Minister Netanyahu today for a briefing. He again stated that he promises to give political safety net for any hostage deal that the government wants to do. However, it is needed either from within the government or from the opposition, i.e. what the opposition leader is saying is if the government does have the option to carry out a hostage deal. However, other ministers within the government say that they will not vote for it, like Itamar Ben-Gvir or Bezalel Smotrich. The opposition leader is saying the government will have enough votes in order to pass this, even if we are still sitting in opposition. Reportedly, also, the leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, and Prime Minister Netanyahu agreed to meet once a week for briefings about the war. Other news, Israel's Speaker of the Knesset, Amir Ohana, is visiting the United States. He met with the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, as well as with other different officials. His visit is going to last several days. Other political news, the French foreign minister is currently visiting Israel. He met with Prime Minister Netanyahu today. He's reportedly also going to visit Lebanon and is hoping to play a role in the diplomatic solution the United States hopes to develop between the two countries. In addition to this, the president of Argentina is going to visit Israel in the coming days. In addition to this, Secretary of State of the United States, Antony Blinken, arrived in Riyadh of Saudi Arabia today. He's beginning his Middle East tour, in which he's also going to visit Israel, Qatar, and several other countries. In addition, the White House also announced today that President Biden will veto any proposed aid package to Israel that separates the package for Israel from the package for Ukraine. The U.S. administration is trying to put forth a joint budget of aid that will combine both Israel and Ukraine. Other elements, specifically in the Republican Party, are trying to separate the two. This may be important when it comes to how fast aid packages to Israel are actually approved in the United States. Other political news, the UN Special Envoy for Sexual Violence, Pramila Patten, is leaving Israel after an 8-day investigation of the events of October 7th. Her team is going to stay in the area still another week. She stated before she left, and I quote, "I have seen things here that I have not seen anywhere in the world. The world outside cannot understand the magnitude of the event. I myself only internalized it after being here." She also added that she understands the feeling of many Israelis of betrayal by the UN as a result of the lack of condemnation after what happened on October 7th, and that her team is going to stay in the area another week, and that she hopes to gather more evidence of the sexual violence that occurred in the October 7th attack. And finally, one report regarding the speculations of the future of the Gaza Strip. In the press conference today, Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant criticized Israel's lack of decision-making regarding the day after what's going to be in Gaza, and he stated, and I quote, "The military achievement requires political action. Only the development of an alternative civilian administration will guarantee the destruction of the Hamas regime. Just as we are living up to our military goals that we set, it's time to make the right decisions so that we live up to the political goals we've set," i.e. what he's saying, and we're seeing this with regards to Hamas starting to regain civilian administration control in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. He is saying that Israel is living up to the military campaign to destroy Hamas's fighting brigades. However, the aim of destroying Hamas politically requires actually setting up a different government other than Hamas, and the fact that Israel has not made a decision on what's going to be means that every time the IDF pulls out of a territory, there's a power vacuum that only Hamas can fill. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.